They insinuate us the road, the impenetrable route to the center of the earth, and also the complex journey to our inner self. Okay, I would like to use the remaining minutes to show you the work of other contemporary Chilean ceramics artists. There are some of them working with landscape inspiration. They are Pascal Lehmann, Fernando Casasempere, he works in London now, Teresita Marín, many of them work the human figure, like Queca Ruiz-Tagle, Luis Mandiola, Bárbara Bravo, Marina Varela, sometimes also animals, Mariana Fernández, Tatané Durán, Mariana Vilan, Fernando Inostroza. Humanized animals, María José Romero, Valentina Vega, expression through utilitarian pieces. This is Bernardita Torres, is here with us. Livia Marín, Mariana Tocornal, organic inspiration like Andrea Hegeman. She's working in New York now. Sofia Donovan. Lise Moller. Architectural inspiration, Isabel Izquierdo. And works about the city problems, Jorge Griño. I hope you have received an overview of what has been and is currently happening with the art of ceramics in Chile, that country at the end of the world. I kindly thank you for your attention.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've covered a lot of ground there. Certainly issues around around post-colonialism, consumerism, industrialization, and then in conclusion, a rise in a ceramic movement in a new territory, certainly from and I'm not positive about this, Eurocentric perspective. I would be very keen to hear your questions for any of the speakers right now. I certainly have one or two, but I'd open it to the floor right now. Thank you.
Thank you for a fantastic session, everybody. I have a question for Neil. With the outsourcing of production of venerable British ceramic firms such as Wedgwood to this region, do you think there's any sensibility that a new Asian inflection will actually happen to the production of those companies?
Design is still centred in the UK, so they still have a strong hold on what's being produced. So I think the kind of influence in that respect is pretty minimal, really. There's been a trend of manufacturing things overseas, then bringing them back to the UK and backstamping them with made in the UK after they've been probably decorated with a line or a kind of, so they can still justify the provenance of where these things have come from. But you know, that's the loophole. But there's been, part of the problem was that countries would buy things like Wedgwood, Royal Doulton, Spode because of that English provenance. They wanted that made in England back stamp. It was buying a piece of kind of Britishness. So once the labels made in Indonesia started to appear on the backs of things, the kind of people were sending back things to the factory. They didn't want it. So it was a kind of an oversight, really. But we're faced now with a situation where there are some companies who are not, you know, they saw the policy of outsourcing as a kind of mistake, so they're wanting to bring back manufacture to the UK. But there is, within that 20-year gap, there's a generation of skilled labour which has gone on to do other things. So, you know, you're kind of faced with this this knowledge base which isn't there anymore. And okay, technology can replace it to a certain degree, but there's nothing like someone who's worked 50 years on a factory with that kind of intimate knowledge.
Are we going to see Indonesian immigration to Stoke as a result? Skilled workers coming?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, the origins of British ceramic manufacture were kind of stolen from the Chinese anyway, you know, the kind of origins of, you know, replication of porcelain. And that kind of seems to get forgotten through the course of time. So yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? As kind of things have developed and sophistication of manufacturers has developed overseas, I'm sure there will be that something else brought back to the UK.
Yeah, thanks also for a great panel. I think there were very, very interesting conversations happening between pieces that were perhaps not obvious at first regard. One of them I'd like to address with the two Latin American guests. And I suppose it also touches on you and myself. This kind of British identity issue is linked to questions of aesthetics. Whether those aesthetics, and I'm going to call them colonial aesthetics, let's call them, because Kukuli is referring to Spanish colonial aesthetics and how that destroyed, identities, and the difficulty to reconstruct identities outside those aesthetics. So I think Kukuli's got a very, very strong response, a very strong and personal response, and I think there's some quite interesting responses happening in Chile as well. What do you, perhaps, Chimena, see as the future of these kind of global identities where these dominant Western modes of aesthetics and dominant schools, and in the case of Ruth Krauskopf, the Vulkos school, which is so clearly entrenched, but also seems to be challenged in a very real way. So what do you see as the future for Chilean ceramics, perhaps?
I think Chile is very different from the other countries in Latin America. It's a very different history for us. We were very isolated, how I say. But now I think the ceramic in the artistic space is just born in Chile. It's a new thing. Then I think it's a special interest about that new things that is happening in art in Chile. A lot of new artists interested in clay, and it's a special thing now for us. I don't know, my English is, I didn't understand the complete answer. I don't know. ¿Está bien?
in Peru, we have a higher percentage of indigenous population than Chile. And also in Peru, we had many, many cultures before the Inca culture came to power. So our history is extremely rich in terms of the arts. In Chile, there were not that many cultures, and the Inca Empire went all the way to Chile. But I think your population would be considered less indigenous than Peruvian. I mean, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador are more similar to each other, and I think Chile and Argentina, Uruguay are more similar in the sense that they are more Western than what we are.
I feel that this discussion is kind of very South American and British European, and I'd love to perhaps hear from Taiwanese about some of these issues, perhaps local identity, post-industrial landscape, because I think this is a question within Taiwan. We've heard very clearly from the local officials that the question of the industry here is quite fragile, and certainly the Inge Museum has a very strong branding project to reinforce local manufacture and to reinforce artistic skills. So I think can we also perhaps open this up to a little bit of Taiwanese input into these questions? How are you guys experiencing some of these questions, whether they be post-colonialism in terms of post-Japanese, in terms of specifically your relationship with China now and the tensions around some of those neo-colonial relationships? Can we just open it up if that's okay?
Could we have
Michael?
comments from the floor with regard to Wendy's direction there, the relationship or the role or the industrial development or redevelopment within Taiwan, perhaps the role of the museum, which is something I was about to ask the panel to comment on as well. If we could invite a comment from the floor, please.
OK， 大家好哈。我想说，台湾的历史事实上也是经过不同时期的殖民，经过荷兰，经过西班牙，经过日本，甚至是中国的殖民。但是我不知道，我是个人是觉得说，在台湾，我们对于这个殖民的这些表达或者是反思，比较少去做讨论，或者是探究。我觉得可能是跟民族性的不同有关系，所以我觉得我们是比较一个被动的去接受它，甚至去让它融入在我们的生活当中。那我听到刚刚之前的这个演讲之后，我比较好奇的是对那个库库里那个秘鲁的那个他的作品，我想请问的是，他的这个作品的造型是都参考远古印加文化留下来的造型，还是说都是你个人的这个创造？纯粹是想象创造的，还是有参考一些神话的故事？那还有另外一个问题就是，在秘鲁当地的居民对于你的作品有什么样的这个反应？谢谢。
The Incas were the last nation before the conquest. They were actually the ones who were in power when the Spaniards came, but before them there were many, many cultures. There were the Chancay, Mochica, Nazca, so many Paracas, Ica, Cupisnique, etc., etc., etc. And some of them didn't even knew each other. By the time that the Incas were in power, the Chimu was in power, were existing, but they were already almost in extinction, and with the Spaniards, they disappeared. So I take images from pre-Columbian work that I've seen all my life, because my parents were very, very nationalistic, and they only exposed me to Peruvian, whatever was Peruvian. Just an example, when I went to the United States, I heard this song, Stairway to Heaven, And I liked it very much, and I was sitting with my husband, and then I put it for him to hear. And I said, isn't this song awesome? And he was like, yeah. After 2 million times that you have heard it, though, it doesn't sound that great anymore. And, you know, I didn't know that it was something that he was already tired of. It was new for me in many ways. When I present my work in Peru, the response is different than in the United States. In the United States, they pay attention to it from its aesthetic value, which is good. But in Peru, I had many people who would come and just shake my hand. And some, I remember a couple of gentlemen with tears in their eyes telling me, this is our problem. And he was referring to the racial tensions that we have in Peru, because even though 99% of the people look like me, 80% maybe, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but many are ashamed of their indigenous background. And everybody would like to be white. You know, that is the problem of colonization. When you want to be somebody else, because you feel the ugly of the movie in which you are never going to be the protagonist. That's how I feel like is the situation in which we are living now. You know, in my work, I only thinking about being again aesthetically the center of my own universe. And that's, I think, when I show my work in Peru is what people felt. You know, this is what we are, this is our problem, how we're going to deal with it. I hope I answered your question. I talk too much.
We have time for one more question. If there's anybody has a comment from the floor, please. Could I invite perhaps one or two people from the panel to comment if you have a thought or an opinion on the role of the museum from the perspective of post-colonialism and post-industrialization. I'm conscious immediately when both Neil and Francesco touched on working with the factories and going into the factories, the sort of sensitive nature of the role of the artist and how best, I think that refers to all the makers on the panel, how best to deal with that and how do you deal with that in that sensitive nature of stepping into these situations and addressing these sensitive issues, and where the museum fits into that?
I think with the project we've just undertaken at SPODE, we found it necessary to engage as much as the kind of locals in what we were doing, so it was important to kind of invite them in and have discussions. And most of the works which were developed through the project were based on some kind of oral historical dialogue, you know, with ex-workers. So they kind of, you know, were fascinated why we were curious in what they were doing. I mean, it's part of my history anyway, but for kind of outsiders coming in, it was quite essential for them to kind of connect and make that, and get that trust, really. Part of the difficulty, I mean, one of the rules I had with initiating the project was that nothing from what we did was a kind of commercially viable thing. It was what we did on the factory stayed with the factory, so there was the kind of ethical thing there of working with people's personal remnants of things. But I think, again, with the role of museums, what they fail to do is acknowledge this knowledge base which is embedded in ceramic production. I think we just see the wonderful kind of glossy object in the case, and you kind of fail to recognize this thing has probably passed through 30, 40 people's hands to get there. And I think kind of illuminating that and making that more prevalent in the museum, you know, to kind of illuminate this knowledge which has gone into some of these objects would be, I think, richer. It'd make things richer. I know kind of museums do it, but I don't see it done enough, really. Yeah.
His title is Shutters, Uncycled and Recycled Ceramics.